Well, good afternoon, or rather good evening, and welcome everyone to this study today in the Word of Almighty Yahweh. And today I decided to take a closer look at a portion of the book of Nehemiah. The Hebrew term is Nehemiah, or sometimes we pronounce it Nehemiah in the more anglicized version, but I'm just going to say what people are more commonly used to, which is Nehemiah, just to keep it, simple. So we're going to take a look at Nehemiah and some specific lessons within the book, and we're going to really focus on half the book, which is going to be specifically the first 6 chapters, and there are 13 chapters total in Nehemiah. But we're only going to focus, as I said, on the first 6 because it's really the section that's most pertinent to the lessons that I want to speak about today. But before we do that, I want to just preface my remarks by looking at a few other verses, talking about related matters, but just kind of as more of an introduction, because what you're seeing described in the book of Nehemiah. And Nehemiah was a governor of Israel. He was a Jewish governor. And in the time of the Persians. And this is after the Jews had returned from Babylonian exile, years after, actually, that they had returned. And I'll give you a little bit of a sense of the timeline in just a little bit. But what you see described in Nehemiah is a rebuilding of Jerusalem, and specifically a rebuilding of the walls of Jerusalem, which is significant for a number of reasons, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But as I preface that study of the specifics of Nehemiah, I wanted to just pave the way with a little bit, no pun intended, with a little bit of a look at just the concept of wall building, temple building, raising a building in general. Because when you come across a passage like 1 Peter chapter 2, and we'll go there first, and we'll begin reading with verse 4. 1 Peter 2:4 says, "And coming to him being Yahshua, and coming to him as a living stone, which has been rejected by men, but is choice and precious in the sight of Yahweh. You also," speaking to the individuals that he was speaking to, "as living stones, are being built up as a spiritual house for a holy priesthood, to offer up spiritual sacrifices acceptable to Elohim through Yahshua Messiah. For this is contained in Scripture. Behold, I lay in Zion a choice stone, a precious cornerstone, and he who believes in him will not be disappointed." This precious value then is for you who believe, but for those who disbelieve, the stone which the builders rejected, this became the very cornerstone, and a stone of stumbling and a rock of offense, for they stumble because they are disobedient to the word, and to this doom they were also appointed. But you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for Yahweh's own possession, so that you may proclaim the excellencies of him who has called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. For you once were not a people, but now you are the people of Yahweh. You had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. So Peter speaks about, as I've explained in the past, about individuals as living stones who are together coming, who are in union, coming together so that they can build something greater, right? So you have a cornerstone, and the cornerstone is important because the cornerstone is the stone that is going to be used as the standard of whether everything else is level and in place. And that cornerstone, therefore, has to be firm. It has to be on a firm foundation, and it has to be something that is almost perfect, so that every other stone that is placed into that building project is also straight and is also in a perfect condition to lay a perfect foundation and then continue to do the build. So when you look at the metaphor that is being described here, the spiritual house that is being built up, well, this spiritual house, quite frankly, is a spiritual temple. And that temple is the temple that is the spiritual temple of the Messiah, who is he is the cornerstone, and that spiritual house is being built up with each one of us, with all those who are his servants, as stones within that temple. And so I just want you to keep that image in mind, that metaphor in mind, as we look at the building project that is being done in Nehemiah. And as I've explained when we did the study on the broader study on Ezra and Nehemiah, when we just read through the books, in Ezra, you see years before what's contained in Nehemiah, maybe around 13 years or so before, you see that Ezra also engages in the building project with the exiles, with the returning exiles, not the exiles, but the returning exiles. And that project is to rebuild the temple itself. And then over a decade later, Nehemiah is on the scene, and now he begins, and we're going to read about it, and now he begins to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. So together, that project of rebuilding the temple and rebuilding the walls, in other words, you're rebuilding the holy city and everything that's important in it. And by extension, therefore, you're rebuilding a people that had been scattered in disobedience and judgment, and now was being renewed and reborn and made into something greater in their own land. But there's the spiritual significance of all of this, which is reflected in what you see here in 1 Peter 2. So none of these things happen in a vacuum, right? These are all spiritual lessons that can be compared the one to another. So when we look at the building project that's being done in Nehemiah, what we're seeing is the rebuilding, not so much of a wall, right, as it is of a people. And we also in our day are being built up as a people, as a temple. We're part of this continuing project, right? This didn't begin with us, obviously. This began way back in Yahshua's time. And it continues to the present day as the stones that we are added to this building project to continue to be laid upon that foundation that came before us. So if you look over at Ephesians 2 also, beginning with verse 17, it builds upon this metaphor. Paul says, speaking of Yahshua, and he came and preached peace to you who were far away, those are the Gentiles, and peace to those who were near, those are the Jews. For through him, we both, Jew and Gentile, we both have our access in one spirit to the Father. So then you're no longer Gentiles, you're no longer strangers and aliens, but you are fellow citizens with the saints and are of Yahweh's household, having been built on the foundation of the apostles and prophets, Messiah Yahshua himself being the cornerstone, which is what we see over in 1 Peter 2, in whom the whole building being fitted together is growing into a holy temple in Yahweh, or as 1 Peter puts it, a spiritual house, in whom you also are being built together into a dwelling of Elohim in the Spirit. You also see this in Revelation 21. I won't turn there, but Revelation 21, 10-14 describes the wall of the New Jerusalem with its gates and foundation stones. But you see, when you have a building project like this, a metaphorical one as well as a physical one, that project does not arise without difficulty, without barriers, without obstacles. So in the same way that you see in the time of Ezra and the time of Nehemiah that they came across opposition, in this present system, we also come across opposition. It doesn't come without cost. And the kind of things that we go through in the day-to-day, in our spiritual walk, are reflections of that. So if we turn over to Luke 14, verse 25, Yahshua says this to the disciples, says, now this is Luke 14, 25. Now large crowds were going along with him, and he turned and said to them, If anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, yes, and even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. Is he saying that we should hate our mothers and fathers and children and brothers? There's more than meets the eyes, more under the surface than that. It's not about hating the people in your life that you love. This type of hate that's being described here is not a hate just for the sake of hating, right? This is the sense is a sense of rejection of the one in terms of the prioritizing, right? This is about prioritizing. If you don't prioritize the walk with me more than mother, father, brothers, sisters, even more than your own life, you can't be his disciple, right? This is like Matthew 6, that you put the kingdom of Yahweh first and everything else falls second to that. Whoever does not carry his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. For which one of you, because it requires sacrifice, right? This walk requires something of us. To carry your cross is to carry an instrument of death. It's to carry an instrument of shame in some quarters, right? Not amongst the people who are like us. To us, it's a badge of honor, right? The cross is a badge of honor and of a grand thing that was done. But to the people out there, the cross is a foolhardy thing. It's an instrument of shame. It's a way to make you look bad. It's a way to make you, it's not something in their minds to be proud of. And yet, that is what we have to carry. That in the eyes of the world may be something that is less than desired, right? But for us, it's everything. But whoever does not carry his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. Are we carrying that cross? Have we taken on that responsibility in our lives? And I think that question is more pertinent now than ever in our lives, because we are in a situation when where this world is looking for it's looking for for answers in the wrong places. They're looking towards government, and they're looking to politics, and they're looking to the entertainment world, and they're looking everywhere except up to Yahweh, right? And that's a mistake, because we need a savior, and that savior is not coming out of Hollywood. That savior is not coming out of Washington. It's not coming out of any state capital, right? That's it. That salvation is coming from Yahweh himself through his designated savior, Yahshua the Messiah. So the one that we represent is Yahshua, but following him is not very popular, right? And proclaiming his truth and proclaiming a moral life that he indicates that we should follow, a life waiting in patience for him, is not something that this world values very highly, but we have to value it. For which one of you, continuing to read in verse 28, for which one of you, when he wants to build a tower, so we have another building project here, a tower, does not first sit down and calculate the cost to see if he has enough to complete it? Otherwise, when he has laid a foundation and is not able to finish, all who observe it begin to ridicule him, saying, this man began to build and was not able to finish. You see, so have we counted the costs of following in Yahshua's footsteps? Have we counted the costs, knowing that, making sure that we have enough to finish the project, right? So as we go through this building project of Nehemiah, and I don't intend for this to go beyond this one session here, although I can actually stretch this out 2 or 3 sessions, but I'm not going to do that. I want us to just think about the underlying issues. And I don't want just us to look just at the surface of what's going on with the rebuilding of the wall. I want you to see that as a metaphor for what we also, what Nehemiah in his day was trying to build, and what we in our day are trying to build. And let's read his story with that metaphor in mind. So as we read about Nehemiah trying to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem, let's look at it as Nehemiah seeing beyond the wall and looking more towards something greater, which is to rebuild a people, right? For Almighty Yahweh. So With that in mind, let's go read. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to read through the first 6 chapters of Nehemiah. And I'm just going to read them straight through like we would do for a Bible Hour 1. And then I'll go back and unpack some of that information. Okay? So listen, the words of Nehemiah, the son of Hakaliah. Now it happened in the month Chislu in the 20th year, while I was in Susa, the capital, that Hanani, one of my brothers, and some men from Judah came. And I asked them concerning the Jews who had escaped and had survived the captivity and about Jerusalem. They said to me, the remnant there in the province who survived the captivity are in great distress and reproach. And the wall of Jerusalem is broken down and its gates are burned with fire. When I heard these words, I sat down and wept and mourned for days. I was fasting and praying before the Allah of heaven, the Elohim of heaven. I said, I beseech you, O Yahweh Elohim of heaven, the great and awesome Elohim, who preserves the covenant and loving kindness for those who love him and keep his commandments. Let your ear now be attentive and your eyes open to hear the prayer of your servant, which I'm praying before you now, day and night, on behalf of the sons of Israel, your servants, confessing the sins of the sons of Israel, which we have sinned against you. I and my father's house have sinned. We have acted very corruptly against you and have not kept the commandments, nor the statutes, nor the ordinances which you commanded your servant Moses. Remember the word which you commanded your servant Moses, saying, if you are unfaithful, I will scatter you among the peoples. But if you return to me and keep my commandments and do them, though those of you who have been scattered were in the most remote part of the heavens, I will gather you from there and will bring them. I'll gather them from there and will bring them to the place where I have chosen to cause my name to dwell. They are your servants and your people, whom you redeemed by your great power and by your strong hand. O Yahweh, I beseech you, may your ear be attentive to the prayer of your servant and the prayer of your servants who delight to revere your name, and make your servant successful today and grant him compassion before this man. Now I was the cupbearer to the king. Chapter 2. And it came about in the month Nisan, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes, that wine was before him, and I took up the wine and gave it to the king. Now I had not been sad in his presence. So the king said to me, why is your face sad, though you are not sick? This is nothing but sadness of heart. Then I was very much afraid. I said to the king, let the king live forever. Why should my face not be sad when the city, the place of my father's tombs, lies desolate, and its gates have been consumed by fire? Then the king said to me, what would you request? So I prayed to the Elohim of heaven. I said to the king, if it please the king, and if your servant has found favor before you, send me to Judah, to the city of my father's tombs, that I may rebuild it. And the king said to me, the queen sitting beside him, how long will your journey be, and when will you return? So it pleased the king to send me, and I gave him a definite time. And I said to the king, if it please the king, let letters be given me for the governors of the princes of the provinces beyond the river, that they may allow me to pass through until I come to Judah. And a letter to Asaph, the keeper of the king's forest, that he may give me timber to make beams for the gates of the fortress, which is by the temple, for the wall of the city, and for the house to which I will go. And the king granted them to me, because the good hand of my Elohim was on me. Then I came to the governors of the provinces beyond the river and gave them the king's letters. Now the king had sent with me officers of the army and horsemen. When Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite official heard about it, it was very displeasing to them that someone had come to seek the welfare of the sons of Israel. So I came to Jerusalem and was there 3 days. And I rose in the night, and I and a few men with me. I did not tell anyone what my Elohim was putting into my mind to do for Jerusalem, and there was no animal with me except the animal on which I was riding. So I went out at night by the valley gate in the direction of the Dragon's Well and onto the refuse gate, inspecting the walls of Jerusalem, which were broken down, and its gates, which were consumed by fire. Then I passed on to the fountain gate and the king's pool, but there was no place for my mount to pass. So I went up at night by the ravine and inspected the wall. Then I entered the valley gate again and returned. The officials did not know where I had gone or what I had done, nor had I as yet told the Jews, the priests, the nobles, the officials, or the rest who did the work. Then I said to them, you see the bad situation we are in, that Jerusalem is desolate and its gates burned by fire. Come, let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem so that we will no longer be a reproach. I told them how the hand of my Elohim had been favorable to me, and also about the king's words which he had spoken to me. Then they said, let us arise and build. So they put their hands to the good work. But when Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite official and Geshem the Arab heard it, they mocked us and despised us and said, what is this thing you are doing? Are you rebelling against the king? So I answered them and said to them, the Elohim of heaven will give us success. Therefore, we, his servants, will arise and build. But you have no portion, right, or memorial in Jerusalem. Chapter 3. Then Eliashib, the high priest, arose with his brothers, the priests, and built the sheep gate. They consecrated it and hung its doors. They consecrated the wall to the Tower of the 100 and the Tower of Hananel. Next to him, the men of Jericho built, and next to them, Zakur, the son of Imri, built. Now the sons of Hasanah built the fish gate. They laid its beams and hung its doors with its bolts and bars. Next to them, Meremoth, the son of Uriah, the son of Hakoz, made repairs. And next to him, Meshulam, the son of Berechiah, the son of Meshazebel, made repairs. And next to him, Zadok, the son of Baanah, also made repairs. Moreover, next to him, the Tekoites made repairs, but their nobles did not support the work of their masters. Yoada, the son of Paseah, and Meshulam, the son of Besodeah, repaired the old gate. They laid its beams and hung its doors with its bolts and its bars. Next to them, Meladiah the Gibeonite and Jadon the Meronothite, the men of Gibeon and of Mitzpah, also made repairs for the official seat of the governor of the province beyond the river. Next to him, Uziel, the son of Harhiah of the goldsmiths, made repairs. And next to him, Hananiah, one of the perfumers, made repairs. And they restored Jerusalem as far as the broad wall. Next to them, Rephaiah, the son of Hur, the official of half the district of Jerusalem, made repairs. Next to them, Yediah, the son of Harumath, made repairs opposite his house. And next to him, Hatush, the son of Hashabneah, made repairs. Malchiah, the son of Harim, and Hashub, the son of Pahath Moab, repaired another section and the tower of furnaces. Next to him, Shalom, the son of Halohesh, the official of half the district of Jerusalem, made repairs, he and his daughters. Hanun and the inhabitants of Zanoah repaired the valley gate. They built it and hung its doors with its bolts and its bars, and 1,000 cubits of the wall to the refuse gate. Malchiah, the son of Rechab, the official of the district of Beth Hakerem, repaired the refuse gate. He built it and hung its doors with its bolts and its bars. Shalom, the son of Kol Hoseh, the official of the district of Mitzpah, repaired the fountain gate. He built it, covered it, and hung its doors with its bolts and its bars, and the wall of the pool of Shilah, the king's garden, as far as the steps that descend from the city of David. After him, Nehemiah, the son of Azbuk, official of half the district of Beit Zur, made repairs, as far as a point opposite the tombs of David, and as far as the artificial pool and the house of the mighty men. After him, the Levites carried out repairs under Rehum, the son of Bani. Next to him, Hashabiah, the official of half the district of Keilah, carried out repairs for his district. After him, their brothers carried out repairs under Bavai, the son of Henadad, official of the other half of the district of Keilah. Next to him, Ezer, the son of Yeshua, the official of Mizpah, repaired another section in front of the ascent of the armory at the angle. After him, Baruch, the son of Zabbai, zealously repaired another section from the angle to the doorway of the house of Eliashib, the high priest. After him, Meremoth, the son of Uriah, the son of Hakoz, repaired another section from the doorway of Eliashib's house, even as far as the end of his house. After him, the priests, the men of the valley, carried out repairs. After them, Benjamin and Hashub carried out repairs in front of their house. After them, Azariah, the son of Maaseiah, son of Ananiah, carried out repairs beside his house. After him, Binui, the son of Henadad, repaired another section from the house of Azariah as far as the angle and as far as the corner. Palal, the son of Uzai, made repairs in front of the angle and the tower projecting from the upper house of the king, which is by the court of the guard. After him, Pedaiah, the son of Parosh, made repairs. The temple servants living in Ophel made repairs as far as the front of the water gate toward the east and the projecting tower. After them, the Tekoites repaired another section in front of the great projecting tower and as far as the wall of Ophel. Above the horse gate, the priests carried out repairs, each in front of his house. After them, Zadok, the son of Immer, carried out repairs in front of his house. And after him, Shemaiah, the son of Shechaniah, the keeper of the east gate, carried out repairs. After him, Hananiah, the son of Shelemiah, and Hanun, the sixth son of Zalaph, repaired another section. After him, Meshullam, the son of Berechiah, carried out repairs in front of his own quarters. After him, Melchiah, one of the goldsmiths, carried out repairs as far as the house of the temple servants and of the merchants, in front of the inspection gate, and as far as the upper room of the corner. Between the upper room of the corner and the sheep gate, the goldsmiths and the merchants carried out repairs. Chapter 4. Now it came about that when Sanballat heard that we were rebuilding the wall, he became furious and very angry and mocked the Jews. He spoke in the presence of his brothers and the wealthy men of Samaria and said, "What are these feeble Jews doing? Are they going to restore it for themselves? Can they offer sacrifices? Can they finish in a day? Can they revive the stones from the dusty rubble? Can they revive the stones from the dusty rubble, even the burned ones?" Now Tobiah the Ammonite was near him, and he said, "Even what they are building, if a fox should jump on it, he would break their stone wall down. Hear, O our Elohim, how we are despised. Return their reproach on their own heads and give them up for a plunder in a land of captivity. Do not forgive their iniquity, and let not their sin be blotted out before you, for they have demoralized the builders." So we built the wall, and the whole wall was joined together to half its height, for the people had a mind to work. Now when Sanballat, Tobiah, the Arabs, the Ammonites, and the Ashdodites heard that the repair of the walls of Jerusalem went on, and that the breaches began to be closed, they were very angry. All of them conspired together to come and fight against Jerusalem and to cause a disturbance in it. But we prayed to our Elohim, and because of them, we set up a guard against them day and night. Thus in Judah it was said, "The strength of the burden bearers is failing, yet there is much rubbish, and we ourselves are unable to rebuild the wall." Our enemies said, "They will not know or see until we come among them, kill them, and put a stop to the work." When the Jews who lived near them came and told us 10 times, "They will come up against us from every place where you may turn," then I stationed men in the lowest parts of the space behind the wall, the exposed places. And I stationed the people in families with their swords, spears, and bows. When I saw their fear, I rose and spoke to the nobles, the officials, and the rest of the people. "Do not be afraid of them. Remember Yahweh, who is great and awesome, and fight for your brothers, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your houses." When our enemies heard that it was known to us and that Elohim had frustrated their plan, then all of us returned to the wall, each one to his work. From that day on, half of my servants carried on the work, while half of them held the spears, the shields, the bows, and the breastplates, and the captains were behind the whole house of Judah. Those who were rebuilding the wall and those who carried burdens took their load with one hand doing the work and the other holding a weapon. As for the builders, each wore his sword girded at his side as he built, while the trumpeter stood near me. I said to the nobles, the officials, and the rest of the people, "The work is great and extensive, and we are separated on the wall far from one another. At whatever place you hear the sound of the trumpet, rally to us there. Our Elohim will fight for us." So we carried on the work, with half of them holding spears from dawn until the stars appeared. At that time, I also said to the people, "Let each man with his servant spend the night within Jerusalem, so that there may be a guard for us by night and a laborer by day." So neither I, my brothers, my servants, nor the men of the guard who followed me, none of us removed our clothes. Each took his weapon, even to the water. And here we're going to skip chapter 5, because it's an interlude with a particular incident or instance of an issue of the Torah that's important, but it's not relevant to this lesson today. So we're going to skip chapter 5 altogether and go straight to 6. Now, when it was reported to Sanballat, Tobiah, to Geshem the Arab, and to the rest of our enemies that I had rebuilt the wall, and that no breach remained in it, although at that time I had not set up the doors and the gates, then Sanballat and Geshem sent a message to me saying, "Come and let us meet together at Chefirim in the plain of Ono." But they were planning to harm me. So I sent messengers to them saying, "I'm doing a great work and I cannot come down. Why should the work stop while I leave it and come down to you?" They sent messages to me 4 times in this matter, and I answered them in the same way. Then Sanballat sent his servants to me in the same manner a 5th time with an open letter in his hand. In it was written, "It is reported among the nations." And Gashmu says that you and the Jews are plotting to rebel. Therefore, you are rebuilding the wall, and you are to be their king according to these reports. You have also anointed prophets to proclaim in Jerusalem concerning you, a king is in Judah, and that will be reported to the king according to these reports. So come now, let us take counsel together. Then I sent a message to him saying, such things as you are saying have not been done, but you're inventing them in your own mind. For all of them were trying to frighten us, thinking they will become discouraged with the work and it will not be done. But now, O Elohim, strengthen my hands. When I entered the house of Shemaiah, the son of Deliah, son of Mehetabel, who was confined at home, he said, let us meet together in the house of Elohim within the temple. And let us close the doors of the temple, for they're coming to kill you, and they're coming to kill you at night. But I said, should a man like me flee? And could one such as I go into the temple to save his life? I will not go in. Then I perceived that surely Elohim had not sent him, but he uttered his prophecy against me because Tobiah and Sanballat had hired him. He was hired for this reason, that I might become frightened and act accordingly in sin, so that they might have an evil report in order that they could reproach me. Remember, O my Elohim, Tobiah and Sanballat, according to these works of theirs, and also Noadiah the prophetess and the rest of the prophets who were trying to frighten me. So the wall was completed on the 25th of the month, Elul, in 52 days. When all our enemies heard of it and all the nations surrounding us saw it, they lost their confidence, for they recognized that this work had been accomplished with the help of our Elohim. Also in those days, many letters went from the nobles of Judah to Tobiah, and Tobiah's letters came to them. For many in Judah were bound by oath to him because he was the son-in-law of Shechaniah, the son of Arah, and his son Yehohanan had married the daughter of, or Yohanan had married the daughter of Meshullam, the son of Barachiah. Moreover, they were speaking about his good deeds in my presence and reported my words to him. Then Tobiah sent letters to frighten me. Now, when the wall, I'll just read the first 3 verses of chapter 7. Nehemiah 7:1. Now, when the wall was rebuilt and I had set up the doors and the gatekeepers and the singers and the Levites were appointed, then I put Hanani, my brother, and Hananiah, the commander of the fortress, in charge of Jerusalem, for he was a faithful man and feared Elohim more than many. Then I said to them, do not let the gates of Jerusalem be opened until the sun is hot, and while they are standing guard, let them shut and bolt the doors. And appoint guards from the inhabitants of Jerusalem, each at his post, and each in front of his own house. Now the city was large and spacious, but the people in it were few, and the houses were not built. It's a lot to unpack in here, isn't there? So I just want to bring out a few important points with regard to this story of Nehemiah, and I want to relate it to what's going on with us in our day. So just a little bit of a quick history. Since the 3rd millennium BCE, that's the 2000s BCE, and of course BCE, we count, going down until we get to Common Era, and then we start going up again, right? So it's 2000, then as history goes on, it becomes 1000 around the time of David and Solomon, and eventually comes down to 586, which is a time when Judah went into Babylonian captivity. So that's all going down in BCE. And then we go into the Common Era. Messiah is born, and then around 30, Common Era, Paul begins his ministry right around that time, and on and on, okay? So since around the 3rd millennium BCE, cities of the Middle East were surrounded by walls made of stone. And those walls made of stone were essentially there for protection, right? So to have a city that was not surrounded by stones in this context was a city that was without protection. And therefore, they were open to attack. They were open to, they were vulnerable, right? So for a city to have no walls, usually you'd have a city with a wall, and then you have gates and gates within those walls to open the doors, and you had to go through the gates. You couldn't go up on the wall, right? And you would have at the city gates, you'd have business and public affairs conducted at those gates. At the tops of the walls, you would have watchmen in towers surveying for enemies. So the walls were important. So when we're talking about walls, right? We don't have walled cities anymore, right? So it's, this is not a significant concept for us. But to an ancient city, particularly a city like Jerusalem, no walls meant no protection and essentially reproach upon a people, right? So if you recall in history, Judah was conquered by Babylon in around 586 BC, and they broke down the walls of Jerusalem. They burned down the temple, and they broke down the walls of Jerusalem. And in actuality, the conquering of Judah by Babylon occurred, and you may not fully be aware of this, in 3 stages. So the conquest actually begins around 605 BCE. That was when you had the first exile in the time of the prophet Daniel, right? So Daniel and his friends were the first ones to be sent to Babylon. They were the nobles, right? They were the special men, the VIPs of Judah, who were taken to Babylon, and then they would try to brainwash them and turn them so that they could be used to influence the rest of the Jews who were going to be coming. We all know how that went, right? But that's another story. But Jerusalem's walls and temple were finally destroyed years later in 586 BCE. And then in around 536, more or less, BCE, Jews begin to return from captivity, beginning under Cyrus, who was the ruler of Persia, which is what we know today as Iran. So this is about, so 536 BC is about 70 years later from when they first started leaving to Babylon, which is around 605 BCE, which fits perfectly with prophecy that 70 years in captivity. So Jews start returning from captivity, but it's not until years later, in the time of Ezra and Nehemiah, where they start to take formation once again as a nation. So there was a lot of neglect. They were not even remotely a people like they were in the time of David. The books of Ezra and Nehemiah were written to describe the restoration of the Jewish state in the Holy Land. So around 457 BCE, Ezra, who was a priest, he recounts the rebuilding of the temple under Zerubbabel, which is the governor at that time. And Ezra, who was a scribe and priest, was the religious head of Judah. And then about 13 years, in the book of Ezra describes, remember that Ezra and Nehemiah in the Hebrew context are usually read as one book. But Ezra recounts the rebuilding of the temple and its associated problems and the opposition that they faced rebuilding the temple. Nehemiah describes, as you see, the rebuilding of the walls of Jerusalem and the problems and barriers that Nehemiah experienced. And that would have taken place around 445 BCE, about 13 years after Ezra. So Nehemiah is sent to rebuild the wall, and he becomes the civil head or the governor over Judah at that time. So the later chapters of Nehemiah, from about 7-8 forward, are describing once the city walls are rebuilt, and they're doing rebuilding projects for housing and everything else. Now they can have some peace within the city gates, and Nehemiah can begin to rule, and he continues to rule as governor of the Jewish people. But going back to chapter 1 and just going through some things chapter by chapter here. So and let me bring up the text again so that you can see that. Lessons and there are so many lessons in leadership and lessons in perseverance when you see the book of Nehemiah. So it talks about when he asks about the Jews and their condition to them, when he asked the men of Judah. Right? By the way, he's the cupbearer of the king. What does that mean? Well, he was an official of the king of Artaxerxes, and what the cupbearer did was he was the person who was the official food taster, right? I mean, he did more than that, but he was responsible to protect the king. So he would have to taste the food, right? Because if someone tried to poison the king, you don't want the king to be the first to find out about it, right? So the cupbearer, I mean, and that's an oversimplification of what he does, but the cupbearer was a very important official, and that's what you want to gather from this. So he was close to Artaxerxes, and so, but he's Jewish, right? And when these men come, he asks about their condition, and he's told that they're in great distress and reproach. This is verse 3. The remnant there in the province who survived the captivity are in great distress and reproach. And it's almost as if reflecting the great distress and reproach of the people. In other words, the people are broken down. And in the same way, the wall of Jerusalem is broken down and its gates are burned with fire. Well, the Babylonians had knocked down the gates and they had burned everything with fire, including the temple, right? So the condition of the wall is the condition, and of the gates is the condition of the people, is what I'm getting at. So as he decides to rebuild, he's rebuilding more than just the walls, right? This is closely linked with spiritual lives. The people are demoralized. There's no unity or cohesion. The people's spirits are broken. You know, walls are often not, by the way, the final blow to the walls came, and again, I'm just drawing some metaphorical things here. The final walls, the breaking down the walls occurred in 586 BCE when Judah was conquered by Babylon. But if you want to really talk about it, the walls started to come down well before the Babylonians brought them down, right? When we're talking about the people, if we're talking about the walls as a metaphorical reflection of what's happening to the people, the walls of Jerusalem came down way before. They were starting to erode for a long time because walls don't typically break down overnight. The way it typically works is that you have a crack that first appears, right? And then if you don't deal with that crack, then little by little, that crack starts to spread. And then erosion begins to take place. And if you don't make repairs in the wall, eventually the entire wall crumbles. So what starts out as a relatively small problem, all of a sudden becomes a huge problem to the point of actual full destruction. It's the same way with our spiritual lives, right? And this is what I want you to take from here. That if we consider our lives as walls, a crack first appears in something that we're neglecting, right? And then spiritual erosion occurs. And if we do nothing about it at that point, it's not going to fix itself, right? If we look at it and say, it's just a little crack, what we don't recognize oftentimes is that little crack is going to continue to spread. And it's eventually going to get worse until the wall crumbles. And from a spiritual standpoint, what it usually means is the collapse of your spiritual life. It's kind of like when you see the same thing with glass, right? If you have a glass pane, let's say you're driving and you get a little stone that, and I'm sure many of us have had that happen to us, where you're driving and a stone comes across and knocks the windshield. And sometimes it puts us a little crack in the windshield. And if you don't deal with that crack, what happens? Eventually, over time, it just starts to spread. And before you know it, your windshield is no good. You have to replace the entire windshield. If you had taken care of it when it was a little problem and gotten it patched up, it wouldn't have spread. It's the same thing with walls, same thing with our spiritual lives. And by the way, when a wall is weak, that's also an ideal time for an enemy to strike. So if you're thinking about these ancient cities, if you had a weak wall, you couldn't survive. And many of you, by the way, have seen like the Lord of the Rings series, and you've seen how you have cities surrounded by walls. What do you need? All you need is one breach in the wall. And as soon as you have a breach in the wall, you're in deep trouble, right? Because then it's that much easier to get into the city. The city would be powerless against the onslaught of the enemy if the wall breaks, if it's breached. So this is something you try to avoid at all costs. So now we look here at Nehemiah talking about the city. He's saying, the remnant in there, they tell him, are in great distress and reproach, and the wall of Jerusalem is broken down. So when he hears these words, he weeps, he mourns for them, right? And he prays to Yahweh. So that's his immediate reaction is the same, is a lesson for us too, right? When you start seeing destruction, spiritual erosion, the first place to go is on our knees, right? Our responses shouldn't be neglect. It shouldn't be fear. It should be deal with the problem, right? So he goes and he tries to deal with the problem. He sits down, he weeps and he mourns. He fasts and he prays before the Elohim of heaven. And he asks Almighty Yahweh, who is the author of all life and who is the creator of all things, he asks him to intervene, to be attentive to his prayer. And he prays for his people. So he's exercising leadership and he's a decisive man. He acts immediately. And by the way, notice he doesn't go run off to Jerusalem right away to start doing things, right? Everything is a process. The very first thing that he does, sometimes when something's going wrong in our lives, and not just with regard to spiritual erosion, right? But this is meant not just to talk about spiritual erosion, but any issues, any problems that we're dealing with in our lives. They don't have to be necessarily that you're your spiritual life is collapsing. I use that as a grand example because it's a huge thing that can potentially happen to us. But if just in life in general, the kind of things that we deal with in a day-to-day, you got to deal with them, right? And you got to have a process to deal with them. I was listening to a sermon recently from Chuck Swindoll, just phenomenal sermon, where he gives a recap of 2021. And he talks about all the different things that were occurring in 2021 and all the different attacks, essentially, of the enemy on the walls, on the spiritual walls of the people. He didn't describe it in those terms. I'm just kind of linking it to this message here. And it was rather impressive to hear a recounting of all those things. But his point of the sermon was not to dwell upon those things, but rather to glorify Yahweh for bringing us through all those things, being with us through all those things, and blessing us in a way that we've come out of it stronger and better than before. So as I look at Nehemiah's approach to things, it was similarly relying upon Almighty Yahweh, recognizing that if we're going to get through this, if we're going to be restored to what existed before, even though we've gone through all these things, it's undeniable that we've gone through all these things. It's undeniable that we were attacked and that Jerusalem was destroyed, that the temple was destroyed. It's undeniable that our country was ripped away from us, and men, women, and children were killed, and countless others were sent into exile. It's undeniable that the walls are broken down and they're burned down. But that's not the end that he saw. What he saw was what could be, the possibilities that could be. What about us? Do we look at the possibilities that could be? Or do we just dwell on the broken walls, on the burned down gates? You see, we have to have a process in place. And we don't have to be a leader or governor like Nehemiah to do that. We just have to follow his example, follow the example of the leaders, right? Of the Ezras and the Nehemiahs of the world. So as he looks at these things, he's saying to himself, we have to take action. And sometimes we think that the immediate action is to go and do something. No. The first thing is to ask Yahweh about it, right? Whatever the problem is in our lives, the first thing is to get down on our knees or sit as he did and pray and ask and turn it over to Yahweh. That to a lot of people, that seems like it's just, okay. Well, no, stop right there. Don't, I've heard this all bit. No, stop and pay attention to that, because that's exactly what he did. And Yahweh heard his prayers. The first thing is to go to him and to ask him for his guidance and to ask him to, whatever efforts you're going to do to deal with the problem, that they will be successful. So as we go into chapter 2, he's starting to formulate a plan. If they're to turn the nation around and effect a revival in the land, he recognizes that a major building project must take place, and it's going to take courage. It's going to take determination. It's not for the weak or faint-hearted, right? But Nehemiah is up to the challenge. Why? Because he has the strength of Yahweh on his side, and because he's a man of character. What about us? Are we people of challenge? Do we see walls broken down in our lives? Have we allowed our walls to erode? And I'm bringing this message particularly, this is sort of a combination between the study and the message, isn't it? I'm bringing this message to play because Yahweh laid it on my heart today to do it, and this is actually, interestingly enough, before I heard that sermon. So, I just think that Yahweh's trying to lead us and guide us, right? Because we've gone through some serious trauma, some serious spiritual trauma in the last couple of years. What are we going to do with that? We're here. We've survived, at least up till this point. Doesn't mean that we haven't suffered. Doesn't mean that family members haven't suffered. Some of you may know people who suffered greatly during these 2 years, and you may have suffered greatly too in certain ways. We all have suffered to a certain degree. But what are we going to do with all that? Are we going to let those things, use the lessons that we learned to do things differently, to do things better, to do things in a way that makes us stronger? Or are we going to just kind of collapse and fall apart, right? So the idea is for us to take these lessons and see how can we emulate these things? How can we imitate them in our lives? Nehemiah was up to the challenge in his day. Are we up to the challenge in our day? Have we allowed our walls to erode and made ourselves vulnerable to the enemy of our faith. So regardless of what the answer to that is, maybe you've been strong all along. Maybe you've been kind of, just kind of leaning into the cracks and not doing much about it. That's okay. But you're here today. But we have to turn to one stronger than ourselves. So going into chapter 2, he's exercising prudence as a leader. So he starts to work the king, right? He sees that they're in great reproach, and he decides to start working a plan. He has to exercise prudence as a leader. While we are not all chosen to lead, as I said, we can imitate those who lead, right? We must make a conscious choice to avoid the mediocrity that characterizes this world. We have to be different. We have to lead by example. And you're a leader probably for people in your life, in your family perhaps, and others around you. We can act in the manner of leaders. Are we not all in training to help the Messiah lead in his kingdom, to be a nation of kings and priests? Will we all have specific positions of authority? Perhaps, perhaps not. Not necessarily. But will we all be useful in Yahweh's kingdom? Well, I believe we will be. And remember that we are already effecting Yahweh's kingdom through our witness on the earth. So I believe that we will be. We're in this transition period now as we wait for Yahshua the Messiah and as we serve as his ambassadors. So I believe that we have a responsibility to model these things in our lives, to be the expert models for this world. And we can learn how to do that by looking at the examples of our past, such as the Nehemiahs of the world. We can help turn things around as Yahweh purges away the dross and recreates this earth to reflect the Eden that he originally intended. So he chooses here in chapter 2 to approach the king. And by the way, he chooses the right time to speak, in other words. He doesn't just go barge in on the king, right? He's very cautious, if you notice, in the way that he talks to the king. Esther, if you remember, did the same thing. Couldn't just walk in and see the king. So he goes to the king very carefully, and he's actually afraid when the king notices that he's a little depressed, right? That's what's being described here. He says, I had not been sad in his presence, but now he was sad, is the implication. So the king said, why are you depressed, right? He says, you're not sick, so this must be that you're depressed. This must be a psychological thing, a sickness of heart. He says, then I was very much afraid. Why was he very much afraid? Well, he was afraid because you didn't really have the luxury of being depressed in front of the king, right? You had to be ready for duty. But he had apparently a very good relationship with him, and he knew how to. He knew he had diplomacy. He says to the king, let the king live forever, right? He knows how to approach him. And then he says gently, right? Why should my face not be sad? Why shouldn't I be depressed when my father's city lies desolate and his gates are consumed by fire? And the king responds to that because he understands. And the king, he understands there's a request behind that. He says, what would you like me to do? And notice what his reaction is before he does anything, right? So I pray to the Elohim of heaven. Again, he turns to prayer. How often do we do that, right? We don't always do that. We don't always turn to Yahweh in prayer because we want to just kind of rush ahead. Don't rush ahead. Allow Yahweh to guide you and to lead you and to help you to make a better plan. And then when he does this, that's not insignificant that he says, so I pray to the Elohim of heaven, right? It's there for a reason for us to take note. And then he says, I said to the king, if it please the king, and it's your servant has found favor, blah, 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 right? So he goes and he gives them all. Then he makes this request. And everything, if you go through here, and I won't read it all again, but he says, again, step by step, let me do this and give me letters so people who try to stop me, I have the proof of papers from you saying that I have the permission to do this. And, let me have letters to get supplies, right? So I can have the supplies to do it. Everything, it's a whole project plan. If you were mapping this out with a chart, an Excel spreadsheet or something, you would have a whole project plan here. And notice the kind of things that he does. He makes sure that he has provisions for materials, right? In other words, going back to what we saw in Luke 14 before, he counted the cost. He planned ahead. And by the way, that manifests itself in different ways in our lives. We have to do that too. We have to make sure that we make provisions for the things that we need to accomplish, not just the physical things. Remember, I'm getting a spiritual, metaphorical concept from this. Do we plan ahead? Do we do things in a way that is step by step, or are we trying to rush things all the time? Because when you rush things, oftentimes you cut corners and you don't do the things that are necessary. For example, right, let me put something very real in it. Let's say you want a particular type of career, but how about if that career is not within Yahweh's will for you? Well, you want to do some things to test that, right? Maybe you want to go and take a course, or maybe you want to go and do a job as an apprentice with someone to see if it works out. And then Yahweh will open the doors or he'll close the doors. Or maybe you want to move to a new location. There was a time when I wanted to move out to the West Coast, and I was sure that I wanted to move to the West Coast. And I laid that course before Yahweh and said, these are certain things that need to happen. And you know what? Those things weren't happening. So I had to say, okay, am I going to force the issue, or am I going to just kind of do first things first? And first things first led me to where I am now. And at the moment, I have no plans to go back to the West Coast, right? I still have plans on the West Coast, but not to move there. And as I'm looking at some of the things going on with the economy and other things and taxes and things out there, I'm very glad that I didn't do that. Yahweh knows what we need, when we need it. Does it mean I'll never do it? No. Who knows? 5 years, 10 years, if I'm still alive, right? But not now. But if I try to force it and go out there, then what happens? I probably would have fallen to pieces and been bankrupt by now. You just never know. Or what about a particular relationship, right? When you were young, people who are maybe are married now, was there someone else that you were looking at? Right? And hard to believe it as it is, I know that it was the case for me, right? And I look back and I say, boy, am I glad that I didn't go in that direction, right? Because you know what I have now. And that to me is more value than I can even describe in words, right? But if I had gone in another direction, and I wouldn't have those wonderful young men that I have, my life would have been so different. And I think, impoverished if I had gone in a different direction. Now, who knows, right? Maybe it would have been a different thing, but we would never know. But my point is that the blessings that I have now, which are great, they would have gone in a completely different direction if I had not trusted in Yahweh at that time. Now, those are the success stories for me, right? I can also tell you non-success stories of moves that I've made where I didn't put Yahweh first, and I wanted to try to rush things, and they didn't work out, surprise, surprise, quite as well as I would have liked them to work out. And I'm sure that you could tell me similar accounts about your life, right? So we have to make those plans and lay them before Yahweh. Like James says, right? Says, don't say I'm going to go out and tomorrow and spend this much and do this thing and that thing. He says, if Yahweh will, then I'm going to do this, that, or the other thing. So so Nehemiah, he makes sure he has provisions, but he also gives a definite time, right? He says to the king, the king says, how long will your journey be? When will you return? It's just a little bit of hesitation on the part of the king, right? The king definitely wants to support him, right? So he's not saying no, but he's saying, how long are you going to be gone? So and Nehemiah senses this. So he acts prudently. It pleased the king to send me, but look what he does. And I gave him a definite time, right? He took a disciplined approach to what he was doing. And that's another thing we could do with regard to our own plans. We could give a definite time. Father Yahweh, I'm going to try this for 6 months. And if doors are not opening, or doors are even better, if doors are closing at a certain time, right, then I'm going to realize it's not for me. So I'm going to give it a time and give it that time, but put a boundary on it so that you don't have that thing indefinitely out there forever. So he gave it a definite time. He made sure that he had provisions and he counted the cost. But also look what he was. He was judicious in terms of who he informed of the project and when. In other words, he waited until he was sure what he wanted to accomplish before he even opened his mouth. He didn't want to overpromise and underdeliver. Talk is cheap, my friends. Many people who act gung-ho over religion are like storm clouds with lots of thunder but no rain. Let's not be like those people, right? With your plans and with your, we have to be judicious in in the kind of plans that we say that we're going to do. He took the time to examine things. He was a thoughtful planner. It reminds us of Genesis 1, right? He goes in chapter 3 and he starts inspecting the walls, right? First, I'm going to go on with there 3 days. I arose in the night. He didn't even wait till the daylight. He rose in the night and he goes out there and he starts to inspect the walls, right? Because he wants to get immediately to the work. And plus, he's given the king a definite time, so there's no time to waste. So once you make a decision, move on that decision. But he had to see everything first. He literally goes around inspecting the walls of Jerusalem. In other words, he took the time to examine. He was a thoughtful planner. It's like Yahweh in Genesis 1. He's following the example of his Father in heaven. Yahweh, who in the very beginning, it says that the Spirit was hovering over the face of the waters. It's brooding over the waters. It's like Yahweh's thinking, okay, what do I do first? What do I do next, etc. And he's planning and he's thinking. And then, okay, I'm going to separate this from this. I'm going to separate the light from the day. I'm going to separate the waters from the land, and on and on. But he plans it and he thinks about it first. Do we think, or we just move forward? In the book of Proverbs, it also tells us that. I don't remember the verse. I didn't write it down, but it also tells us that we need to think before we act and not act rashly, right? I'm paraphrasing, but that's what it says. It says that the people who run forward without thinking about it first will usually end up in trouble. And then he also does what? He goes to all these officials. He says to them, you see the bad situation we're in. Let's do this. Come, let us rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. Verse 17. So what is he doing? He's engaging others who are responsible and trustworthy. Why? Because nobody does it alone. What about you? Do you have allies in your life? Family members, friends, people that you can count on, brothers and sisters in the faith, people that you can count on to help you to fulfill your plans. You got to engage others who are responsible and trustworthy. Not just everybody. You got to be careful about the people that you choose, but once you choose them, trust them and engage and delegate and enlist them in your life to help you with your plans. And he encouraged them. He assured them that victory is possible in Yahweh. And I wish I had time to go back and correspond with every single verse, but you remember as we read it, he encouraged them, he assured them. And they were going to face many challenges, right? As you see, they faced many challenges. Completing the project required the utmost patience and dedication. And they had to have an active participation with the attitude that the goal would be reached no matter what. And he kept on emphasizing to them, like here in verse 20, the Elohim of heaven will give us success, even to the enemies, right? This is in the context, verse 20, of the enemies who said, you're what are you doing? You're rebelling against the king? Notice the tendency of people who don't understand what you're doing to immediately take things out of context or take things out of whack and try to make it seem something because they don't know what they're talking about. You're going to run across people like that, right? Who won't understand what you're trying to accomplish, spiritually or otherwise. But he says to them, the Elohim of heaven will give us success. Therefore, we, his servants, will arise and build, because we put our trust in him, you see. Now, as we go into chapter 3, it describes the assignments given to specific individuals along the perimeter of the gates. And you see one by one how each of them fulfilled their respective assignments. And that is consistent, incidentally, with the biblical teaching that everyone in the body of Messiah has a specific role or function in accordance with the gifts, the talents, and the strength that Yahweh has provided to each and is empowered to perform by the Holy Spirit. This is 1 Corinthians 12 stuff, right? This is Ephesians 4 stuff. Everyone has a role. So as you see these people and you think, oh, Yehoiadan, Paseah, Meshulam, and Zadok, and Bana, it's all Greek to me, right? Actually Hebrew, right? But it's don't rush by that, right? Because you're looking at it, and I understand it's a little boring to read. It's not, it's not the most flowing thing ever, but don't, right? Everyone's afraid of that stuff. Don't be afraid of that. That's the good stuff. Eliashib, what was he? He was the high priest. He rises with brothers, right? Look at the details. He rises with brothers to priests and consecrates it. See, people are emboldened by Nehemiah. Sometimes all it takes is one person who's excited about the work, right? He's emboldened by it. Are we emboldened by our faith? Sometimes I think that we're not vocal about it because we're afraid of what other people might say. And I understand that. I get that tendency, especially when what we believe tends to be so much different than what many other people believe. That's okay. I understand that. But don't be afraid as ambassadors of Yahweh to get out there and let people know who you are. And I don't mean going out there and browbeating people with the Bible, right? I mean showing them the kind of person, the kind of morality that we live, the kind of hope that we have for the future. Those things you can show to people, and you can show them a different way of life. You can show them that things are not done this way, but that they're done this way. And you don't have to be afraid to speak up about things because we serve the living Elohim, right? Don't be ashamed of your faith, is what I'm saying. Doesn't mean you have to go around browbeating people, right? But don't be ashamed of your faith. Stand tall. You have a role to play. The high priest arose. He goes and he does his thing. They consecrated this and the man of Jericho, right? And then the other one does the fish gate. I'm curious. I've never really done the study in all these. The fish gate. I'm kind of curious. Is that where they brought the fish when they were doing, commerce? I don't know. They laid its beams, they hung its doors, and then Meshulam, right? And then this other one does this, and this other one does that. And then these guys were perfumers, and these guys are goldsmiths. Don't let those things be lost to you. All those were things that they had things to contribute, right? And then these guys did the valley gate. Then there's the refuse gate. And maybe it wasn't too pleasant to work by the refuse gate, but you know what? Someone's got to do it. So these guys did it, and they did a great job, right? And then you got these guys at the fountain gate, which is probably a lot more pleasant than the refuse gate. They built it, they covered it, and then they did things at the king's garden, and then these other ones did stuff by the artificial pool, and then the Levites, right, were the teachers, and they do their repairs. And then the brothers did this, and on we could go. Again, this is 1 Corinthians 12 stuff, which is your gifts, whatever it is that you have to contribute to the building of the wall, to the building of this project that First Peter is talking about. You do it. You do your part, right? And then as we get to chapter 4 is the tough one, right? Chapter 4 is when the stuff starts to hit the fan, yes? And Sanballat and Tobiah, they're at their fever pitch, because usually once you start moving on something, that's when all the obstacles and barriers come right. And by the way, you could be just coasting along. Isn't this true in your life? You could be just coasting along and just kind of passively living your life and supposedly not bothering anyone, not moving, no waves, not causing any waves, and on and on. And you're totally, you're just kind of living your life and moving along. You think there's peace and everything is well. But the moment that you decide to do something, I'm not talking about conspiracy here, but doesn't it often happen that the moment you decide to take action on some particular thing in your life, all of a sudden the stuff starts to hit? Is that not true? Has that not been true in your life? I promise you it's been true in my life. So what do we do when that happens? Well, the first thing we probably should do is laugh, because of course that's going to happen, right? And by the way, I say that now, but when those things have happened to me, full disclosure, I did not laugh, okay? But I'm a lot better about it now than I used to be, probably because I'm older and I don't care as much about a lot of stuff. And that's a story for another day, right? But let's think about it. Usually that's when things start to, and then everyone wants to blame it on the adversary, right? Well, sometimes it is. Sometimes, a lot of times it's not. A lot of times it's just because, according to the law of averages, once you actually start moving and once you're in motion, it's more likely that according to the law of averages that things are going to happen, right? If you're sitting doing nothing and you're just sitting like a lump of coal, of course nothing's going to happen. How could it happen? You're not moving. You're not taking any action in your life. But the minute you decide to pursue a goal, the minute you decide to get some kind of an outcome, you better believe something's going to occur. Why? Because it's like the laws of physics, right? As soon as you actually start moving, an action creates an equal and opposite reaction. I don't remember a lot from physics, but I do remember that. And that's what's going to happen. You just have to be prepared for it. Matter of fact, you should even factor it in. I have one person who teaches goal setting, that when she says, when you put out your goals and you put stuff out there, you want to include the obstacles and barriers. You want to foresee them, the obstacles and barriers. Matter of fact, when you do an official project plan, they teach you to come up with and I forgot exactly what they called it, but like a change management plan or some kind of a plan to deal with the obstacles that will inevitably come up. Because you don't want to wait till the thing is happening. It's part of counting the cost, right? We see that with regard to money. If you come short on money, like the parable says, you can't finish the project. You didn't think long and hard enough about it. But money is not the only thing. Did you have enough materials? Did you have enough time? Did you build in enough time to do the project? Did you build in enough time to try to buy a new house? Did you build in enough time to invest in another person to try to build a relationship? And on we could go, right? Or are you trying to just get things done because you feel that the world owes you? The world doesn't owe us anything. It doesn't work that way. So as soon as you start moving, you better expect that things are going to start to happen. And then when we're talking about something, when we're talking about something spiritual in nature, such as this was, oh yeah, the adversary is going to kick in. I promise you. I'm not saying to you, hey, if the adversary maybe, I'm telling you, he's going to kick in. I don't think we need to give him all the credit that people give him, right? Because of course, what you got to say is, of course he's going to come in. Of course he's going to. Plan for it. Be ready for it. Build in room into your project to do it. Sometimes it comes out of left field. Sometimes the hit comes a lot harder than we expected, but the fact that it comes shouldn't surprise anybody. We're told that we're going to get attacked, right? We're told that because they persecuted Yahshua, that he's going to persecute us as well. And then all of a sudden we look around like deer caught in the headlights. Like, what happened? How come I'm being attacked? Why? We knew that was going to happen. This is why we need the armor of Yahweh as described in Ephesians, right? Because we know we're going to need it. Nehemiah knew that. Totally expecting it. And what does he do? He uses Sanballat, not Nehemiah, Sanballat and Tobiah. They use criticism, mockery as weapons, right? They seek to demoralize, to dampen the spirit. That's how that works, right? They reveal, someone like Sanballat reveals the fullness of the depravity of man. They can't have it, and neither can anyone else. They don't do anything, but they're going to destroy the people who try and demoralize the people who are trying to do it. That's human nature, right? And when the adversary is behind something like that, and by the way, you see no mention of the adversary here, but you know that that's the spirit of the adversary. It's just the inborn nature of man, of unrepentant, unregenerate man. Let me be more specific, is to follow the inclination of the adversary. Right? This is why we have to guard against that and replace that with the attitudes of the spirit instead. He plays, by the way, upon the emotions and the basest instincts of man, such as anger and negativism. What are these feeble Jews doing? 4 verse 2. Notice that. Is immediately he has to appeal to the Jew, the race card, right? What are these feeble Jews doing? What are these dirty Jews doing? They're people, but he has to mention they're feeble Jews. You see, this is the nastiness, right? Are they going to restore it for themselves? Could they offer sacrifices? In other words, you're going to come up with every negative thing. Can they finish it in the day? Can they revive stones from the dusty rubble, even the burned ones, right? And Tobiah is always the little instigator on the side, right? The little worm tongue. Even what they're building, he's got to come in with a smart remark. Even what they're building, if a fox jumps on there, he's going to break that. It's going to be so weak that even a fox is going to break it down. Yeah, well, not so much, right? When you go over in 52 days later, he's eating a humble sandwich, right? 52 days. That's less than 2 months. The work was done. So much for jumping foxes and feeble Jews. They built the thing and for a good portion of the time with one hand hammering and the other hand with their hand ready on their sword to attack, or rather to defend. That's courage and that's character. But this guy, Sanballat, and Tobiah, his worm-tongued friend, cowards, right? They reveal themselves to be the cowards that they are deep inside. They conspire against the truth. They act throughout these chapters with stealth, threats, terroristic threats, just like the Amalekites who attacked Israel from behind, and they came to nothing. And you're going to have the ones who attack you too. And by the way, if you haven't experienced it, you haven't been on Twitter, my friend. Okay, get yourself a Twitter account. You wanna put yourself out there. Get yourself a Twitter account. I promise that you'll get the Sanballats and the Tobias of the world. They're plentiful. There are teams of them, right? Only these days we call them trolls and haters and assorted other names, right? And the thing about Twitter that you and the platforms like it that you need to realize is that all it is people's opinions. Flat, raw opinions, uninformed opinions, 95, 99% of the time, uninformed, uneducated, ignorant, and yet people build their lives upon their opinions. And everyone has one, right? Everyone has an opinion, whether it's solicited or not, just like these guys. This is ancient Twitter by the wall, okay? And in chapter 5, and Nehemiah's response, keep building. His response is not ignore it, right? Necessarily, because ignoring it doesn't mean it's going to necessarily go away. But his response is also not become demoralized and give up and slow down the work. On the contrary, we're going to pick it up even more, and we're going to put guards there. His response is to handle it, right? Not to ignore it, to acknowledge the reality of what it is. Oh, it's not imaginary. It's really happening. You have people who hate you. Acknowledge it, right? You're not going to please everyone. Maybe they don't like peaches. If you don't understand the reference, someone said one time, sometimes, that it's like if I'm a big juicy peach, and I assume that everyone is going to love me because I'm a nice big juicy peach. But what about people who don't like peaches? There may be people who hate peaches. Maybe they love apples and bananas and strawberries, but they don't like peaches much. And some people will vehemently hate peaches, and other ones just don't like them, right? That's okay. You don't have to love peaches. You don't even have to like peaches. And the ones who don't like peaches are not going to come to me. And it's taken me most of my lifetime to realize that not everybody has to like peaches. And I had my reaction most of my life has been, why don't you like peaches? I'm juicy. I'm delicious. This is try to get past the reference. Okay. And just hear my point. But the fact of the matter is, not everyone's going to like peaches. That's hard for me to live down. But, I'm at this point in my life, I understand it. I acknowledge it. I can accept it better. And that makes all the difference in my mind. So sometimes if someone doesn't want to do anything with me, it's not because of me. I've always made it about me. Well, they don't like me. They don't like the way I think. They don't like the way I look. They don't like the way, maybe they just don't like peaches. But there are other people who like peaches. You guys right now, you sort of like peaches because you're here listening to me, right? There are many, many more people who could be here who are not here. Why? They don't like peaches. Okay. You like pears. Go for the pears. That's okay. Just don't get in my way, right? But I'm not going to let them get in my way. And with you, whatever it is that you're working on in your life, understand that not everyone's going to like peaches or bananas or strawberries, right? And it has nothing to do with you. It's all about the way they're thinking about it. So I could say a lot more about that, but that's a whole other message. So going back to chapter 5, chapter 5, we skipped. But going to chapter 6, more the same. They're coming up with, let me get down to chapter 6. They're still angry. And by the way, they get angry. They get angry. Let people get angry, right? Let people not understand. It's not about them. It's about what you want to accomplish. Their opinion of you is none of your business. Sanballat, Tobiah, Geshem's, these people's opinions of Nehemiah and the Jews were none of their business. So they didn't ignore it because it would have been unwise, right? They had to take precautions, but they didn't give them undue time and influence, right? They didn't make their lives and their work dependent on whether Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem and the others liked their work. They acknowledged, okay, you're a threat. If they had just said a bunch of stuff, it would have been Okay, we're just going to work. But they were actually threatening their lives, right? At some point. And then they had to take action. They had to say, oh, okay. Because it says they were planning to harm me. They actually took steps. Now, most of us will not have that level of opposition and barriers, right? But in a spiritual sense, we might have those who try to tear us down. And in a case like that, you're not going to let them do that. You have to plan. You have to acknowledge that there's a threat, but you also just make provisions to deal with the threat, but you keep on moving. Armed with the sword of Yahweh's word at your side and with the hammer, hammering away, doing your work, right? You keep working, ready with the sword of Yahweh's word to respond. So in chapter 6, when the enemy can't achieve his aims, he's going to resort to deceit. He's going to resort to trickery. Expect it. Expect barriers to come in a way that is not conventional. Because sometimes if the enemy can't get his way the regular way, he's going to try to go around the back way to deceit, to treachery. Will work through people that you love, right? So maybe you're doing just fine, but maybe your companion is not doing fine. And all of a sudden, now you have a problem because the person that you love the most is down in the dumps, right? Or your child is going through a rough time, or, right? This is the way it happens because the enemy will work through you to, or rather try to go against you directly. But sometimes if he can't attack you directly, he's going to use those who are closest to you. And we have to be prepared because we are not unfamiliar with the mechanisms of the adversary, to paraphrase one of the scriptures. We are not unaware of his schemes, right? We have to be prepared for that. But we have to continue moving forward because the aim of the enemy is to make you afraid. And it is that fear, more often than not, that's going to keep you more than anything else from achieving your goals, spiritual or otherwise. It is that fear because the enemy will make you afraid, or your own mind, right? Let's not even put in the enemy. Your own mind will make you afraid. Your own insecurities will make you afraid. Deal with it. Come up with a plan and overcome it. Because the fear is going to be worse, more than likely, than the actual reality of the situation. A lot of times, the fantasy of something going wrong oftentimes is worse than when you actually go and do the thing. And the enemy, by the way, when there's an enemy involved, will lie and slander you because Satan is the father of lies. Don't let it stop you from doing the work. What should our response be? Well, it should be Nehemiah's response, right? And first of all, immediately turn to Yahweh to ask him to intervene on your behalf. Another thing to do is to remember that we are to fight. And remember what it is you're fighting for. Is it for your family? Is it for your career? Is it for your spiritual life? You could be in a defensive mode, right? Like I've described many times, particularly against the enemy of our faith, that in Ephesians 6, it describes a defensive posture and not an offensive posture, but you still have to be armed. You still have to be prepared. You still have to exhibit courage. And Nehemiah said more than once, you have to have a mind to work. Do we have a mind to work? Can we be diligent and resolved to finish the job, whatever that job is, even if it means having one hand on the work and one hand by your weapon? And by the way, in verse, back in Nehemiah 4:14, one thing I neglected to mention is he says what? He says, do not be afraid of them. Remember Yahweh, who is great and awesome. Fight for your brothers, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your houses. Two things I'll say here. Encourage one another. We have to get encouragement from our friends. We have to get encouragement from those closest to us. It'll help us to get the work done. But also, to me, very important to take away from here, remember what it is you're fighting for, right? It's not remember also that we're to fight, but remember why you're fighting. Remember what you're fighting for. Remember what your why is. That was one of the emphases of Chuck Swindoll's sermon that I mentioned earlier, is to remember what Yahweh did for us. I spoke this also in a sermon about David a couple of years back. And I mentioned that one of the things that, and I owe my thoughts to Robert Chisholm, I think his name was, from Dallas Theological Seminary for that thought, is that in the Psalms, you see David doing that all the time. recalling what Yahweh has done in his life. Remember when you did this. Remember that you pulled me out from here and you pulled me from there and you pulled me out of the pit, the miry pit, and that, right? We don't remember things often enough. We see all the stuff in front of us, but we don't remember what Yahweh has already done in our lives. You see how many times Yahweh, that's a sermon in of itself, how Yahweh says to the children of Israel more than once, remember this, remember that, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Remember that you were slaves in the land of Egypt, so don't treat the stranger poorly, because remember that you were slaves in the land of Egypt. Remember when you didn't have this, when you didn't have that. Remember that other people built this thing that you didn't build, and on and on and on, right? We have to remember, because if we fall into the same traps again, that's bad. But also, if we don't remember that Yahweh's the mighty one of history, the things that he did in the past are the things that he does now, because Yahweh was, and he is to come. And that's not going to change. It's the meaning of his name. And if he was the Elohim who brought David through everything that he went through, he's going to bring you through it too. And if he's the Elohim who brought Israel out of the land of Egypt into a land of promise, he's going to do it for you too. And if he took Yahshua from that terrible death that he had and raised him up from the dead, raised him up from the worst situation that a person could be in, he could raise us up too. And on I could go, right? Last few things from Nehemiah 6, and then we'll be done. Keep a level head and do not give in to anxiety and fear. It kind of goes along with what I was just saying, particularly when you're being slandered, right? And that's going to happen sometimes. I've been slandered before, more than once. It is what it is, right? You can't, sometimes the more you try to defend yourself, the more difficult it is to try to keep everything together, because people are going to believe what they want to believe. Live by example, and others will generally see the truth of the situation. Nehemiah didn't try to stop everything that was said about him, right? Yeah, you're trying to rebel against the king, and you want the Jews to rebel, and you want to make yourself governor and blah blah blah, right? He said simply, none of the stuff that you said, and I don't have the verse in front of you, he said none of the stuff you said is true. But he wasn't trying to convince them, no, and no, you say whatever you want, dude. This is what we're doing. I don't care what you say. Prove it, right? But do it somewhere else, because we have work to do. Keep a level head. Live by example, and others will generally see the truth of the situation. And of course, stand strong in Yahweh and trust in his sovereignty. Trust in his sovereignty, because he's going to make the provisions. Chuck Swindoll gave the example of manna, right? They didn't know from day to day, but they had the manna. And it wasn't the most pleasant thing in the world. It wasn't the most exciting thing in the world. Maybe not even the most tasty thing in the world, but it got the job done. And trusting in Yahweh's sovereignty brought them through that difficult time in the desert and brought them to a greater thing in the future, even though it didn't seem like that at the time. And then finally, stand firm and see the fruit of your faith in Yahweh as he leads you to victory, which is what we see when the wall is completed. You see that verse 15, in 52 days. Remember that he had given the king a definite time. We're not told what that definite time was. I wonder if it was considerably longer than 52 days, and they got it done in 52 days. The wall was completed on the 25th of the month of Elul in 52 days. As Nehemiah's enemies saw the victory that came in Yahweh, as you see if you continue to read, notice what it says. It's kind of interesting. When all our enemies heard of it, and all the nations, this is 6:16, and all the nations surrounding us saw it, they lost their confidence, for they recognized that this work had been accomplished with the help of our Elohim. All glory to Almighty Yahweh. When all our enemies heard of it, and this is speaking about physical enemies, but I say also it extends to spiritual enemies. When all enemies heard it, all the nations saw it, all the powers and dominions, etc., on the soil, they lose their confidence, because victory is found in Yahweh. They're forced to recognize the sovereignty of Yahweh, like the priests of Baal, who went up and about and all for who knows how long, right? And cutting themselves and everything, nothing. And then all Elijah does, Yahweh, please hear my prayer. Fire from heaven consumes everything. And the enemy saw it, and they're forced to recognize it. All the people around them are forced to recognize Yahweh is Elohim. Yahweh is Elohim. The enemies are forced to recognize the sovereignty of Yahweh and his purpose. And so it will be with the enemies of Yahweh, with the establishment of the body of Messiah and the kingdom of Yahweh. Wait for it. Wait for the salvation of Yahweh. Let's finish up over in Isaiah 26, and we'll read the whole chapter. In that day, this song will be sung in the land of Judah. We have a strong city. He sets up walls and ramparts for security. Open the gates that the righteous nation may enter, the one that remains faithful. The steadfast of mind you will keep in perfect peace, because he trusts in you. Trust in Yahweh forever. For in Elohim Yahweh we have an everlasting rock. For he has brought low those who dwell on high, the unassailable city. He lays it low to the ground. He casts it to the dust. The foot will trample it, the feet of the afflicted, the steps of the helpless. The way of the righteous is smooth. O upright one, make the path of the righteous level. Indeed, while following the ways of your judgments, O Yahweh, we have waited for you eagerly. Your name, even your memory, is the desire of our souls. At night, my soul longs for you. Indeed, my spirit within me seeks you diligently. For when the earth experiences your judgments, the inhabitants of the world learn righteousness. Though the wicked is shown favor, he does not learn righteousness. He deals unjustly in the land of uprightness and does not perceive the majesty of Yahweh. O Yahweh, your hand is lifted up, yet they do not see it. They see your zeal for the people and are put to shame. Indeed, fire will devour your enemies. Yahweh, you will establish peace for us, since you have also performed for us all our works. O Yahweh, our Elohim, other masters besides you have ruled us, but through you alone we confess your name. The dead will not live, the departed spirits will not rise. Therefore you have punished and destroyed them, and you have wiped out all remembrance of them. You have increased the nation, O Yahweh. You have increased the nation. You are glorified. You have extended all the borders of the land. O Yahweh, they sought you in distress. They could only whisper a prayer. Your chastening was upon them. As the pregnant woman approaches the time to give birth, she writhes and cries out in her labor pains. Thus were we before you, O Yahweh. We were pregnant. We writhed in labor. We gave birth, as it seems, only to wind. We could not accomplish deliverance for the earth, nor were inhabitants of the world born. Your dead will live, their corpses will rise. You who lie in the dust, awake and shout for joy. For your dew is as the dew of the dawn, and the earth will give birth to the departed spirits. Come, my people, enter into your rooms and close your doors behind you. Hide for a little while until indignation runs its course. For behold, Yahweh is about to come out from his place to punish the inhabitants of the earth for their iniquity, and the earth will reveal her bloodshed and will no longer cover her slain. So it ends on a bit of an ominous note, but a time of justice and judgment. So I hope that this message has been at least a little bit encouraging to you, and I hope that you realize that our Elohim, our sovereign, is strong, and he will help us and he will encourage us no matter what we've gone through over the last couple of years and what lies ahead, which none of us know, right? We know that Yahweh will be with us no matter what enemies, spiritual or otherwise, that if we trust in him, if we put our confidence in him, we're going to be okay. We have about a month or so before Passover and Days of Unleavened Bread. And with this study/message, I'd like to begin setting the tone for us to move towards victory in Almighty Yahweh, to have an attitude of rejoicing before his presence as we begin to examine our lives in a deeper way, to see where we are in our walk with him. And if we need to do some shoring up of those walls, let's start now. Let's examine the cracks and not ignore them. They're not going to go away on their own. Whatever those cracks are, let's start repairing. And if we need help to do the work, let's look for one another. Let's look for those allies who can help us, who are on our side, who can help us in the work. and let's get it done. Even if it's hard to do, it's hard to face cracks in the wall. It's hard to face repairs that need to be made, but it's necessary. And I pray that each one of us will take the time to do that. So thank you for spending your time with me today. And at this time, we can close the recording.